believe you would do this to me! Please, I'm so sorry.
How dare you defy me? You are completely useless.
I can't believe you!
Oh my God!
Why would you do this?
I have something for you.
Oh, you are too kind.
The hall was packed with distinguished guests, glasses clinking and laughter echoing like rehearsed music. Among them, the young blonde maid moved discreetly, carrying a tray with trembling hands. But all it took was one slip, a drop of wine spilling, nearly staining the wealthy wife's dress, for the pretense of elegance to crumble. The furious woman stood up, pointed her finger, and in a piercing voice shouted before everyone, "You're useless. You're not even fit to serve." The hall fell silent, and the quiet laughter began. The maid lowered her eyes, pent-up tears burning her soul. Everyone believed they were witnessing yet another banal humiliation, but they didn't know that night, the millionaire's decision would change everything. The finger still extended, his wife's voice echoing like a sentence, and the maid standing motionless, almost breathless. Then the unexpected happened. The millionaire, until then silent in his prominent chair, stood up. His gaze swept the entire room before settling on his wife. The silence was absolute, each guest waiting for him to reinforce the humiliation, but his lips parted to say something no one dared imagine. The atmosphere grew dense, and everyone felt they were about to witness a turning point that would forever mark that evening. If you felt the power of this story in these first moments, imagine what's yet to come. Every detail holds a twist. Every silence conceals a weight. Take the opportunity to like and subscribe to the channel, so you can journey together to the end of this narrative where destiny always reveals its face. The mansion's ballroom was lit by imposing chandeliers, reflecting the ostentation of a party carefully planned to display wealth and power. Crystal glasses clinked, soft music filled the space, and the guests smiled practicedly, each seeking their place in the invisible hierarchy that governed these walls. It was a night of luxury, but also of sharp vanity. Among discreet waiters and elegant guests, the young blonde waitress moved almost invisibly. Beautiful, delicate, and still very young, she carried a tray of drinks with steady hands, though her racing heart was making her tremble inside. She was used to being invisible, to going unnoticed among expensive dresses and impeccable suits, but all it took was a small slip for her presence to be noticed, and almost always for the worst possible reason. The millionaire's wife, the hostess of the party, was radiant in her tight red dress, sporting diamond necklaces, and a gaze that always sought someone to belittle. She watched the maid with disdain, as if her every move were a mistake waiting to be punished. The moment came quicker than anyone expected. While serving one of the tables, the waitress let a drop of wine run down the rim of the glass. A small, almost imperceptible accident, but it was enough to ignite the spark of arrogance. The wife stood up suddenly, her heel clicking loudly against the marble, drawing the eyes of everyone present. Her hand rose, the finger pointing directly at the maid, as if she were facing a criminal. "Look at this," he exclaimed, his voice echoing through the room. "Even to hold a tray, this useless failure." Silence fell. The guests looked at each other, some snickered, others looked away, embarrassed but complicit in the silence. The maid froze, her face flushing, her eyes welling up. The wife continued, taking advantage of the stage that had been created. "I should have seen it coming. People like you should never be in a house like this. You tarnish the perfection of my party." The laughter of some guests echoed, and the maid lowered her head, gripping the tray tightly to keep it from falling. Inside, pain burned like fire. It was yet another humiliation among so many, but tonight she wouldn't be alone. Sitting at the head table, the millionaire watched the scene in silence. His face, previously neutral, began to transform. His eyes narrowed, and his breathing changed. Few noticed at the time, But something inside him was about to explode. The hall, once filled with rehearsed music and laughter, was now a judgment hall. All eyes were on the young maid, who trembled silently under the weight of her wealthy wife's accusing finger. The tray in her hands felt heavier by the second, and her tears threatened to fall before everyone. The wife, intoxicated by the attention she had received, decided to extend the show. She walked a few steps until she was facing the maid. Her red dress shimmered under the golden lights of the room, and her painted lips twisted in a cruel smile. "Tell everyone here," he said loudly, so that no one would miss a syllable. "How long did it take you to learn to fail at even the simplest tasks?" Some guests laughed, others shook their heads in disapproval, but no one dared intervene. The wife's cruelty was already known, and complicit silence was her way of avoiding becoming the next target. The maid, her face flushed, tried to mumble an apology, but her voice wouldn't come. The lump in her throat was too heavy, and that was exactly what the wife seized upon to attack even more. "You're not even good enough to talk. Then I'll say it for you. You're nothing. Nothing but a stain that I'll rip out of this house." The crack of the words echoed like an invisible slap. The maid lowered her head even further, her body curled up as if she wanted to disappear. The millionaire, seated at the central table, observed everything. Until that moment he seemed oblivious, as if it were just another routine scene. But if you looked closely, you could see that his expression had changed. His fingers tapped against the table in a subdued rhythm, his eyes following his wife's every gesture with growing unease. The guests began to whisper. It was unusual to see him silent for so long. Many expected that at any moment he would rise to reinforce his wife's words, confirming the maid's humiliation. It was what he always did, support the scene to demonstrate power and control the narrative. But there was something different that night. The wife, still facing the young woman, decided to deliver her final blow. With a theatrical gesture, she lifted her chin and declared before everyone, "From today onwards you are forbidden from setting foot in this house. I don't even want to hear your name mentioned. Get out of my sight, now." The room held its breath. Everyone expected to see the maid walk through the doors in tears. But before she could take a step, the millionaire's chair scraped across the marble, making a sound that made everyone turn. He was standing. His gaze was hard, cold, but not toward the maid, toward his own wife. Tension coursed through the room like an electric current. The guests, motionless, awaited his next sentence, certain they were about to witness something unimaginable. The sound of the chair scraping against the marble still echoed when the millionaire stood up. The entire room froze. It was as if time had stopped, every breath held, every gaze fixed on his figure. The millionaire slowly adjusted his jacket, as he did in important meetings, but his eyes weren't on the guests or the maid. They were fixed on his wife. For a moment she smiled, believing she would receive support. After all, it had always been this way. He sustained his cruelties in public, and together they formed an empire of fear and arrogance. But this time, something in his gaze was different. "That's enough," he said, his voice deep and calm but heavy. The room erupted in murmurs. The wife's eyes widened in surprise, and for a moment she lost control of her breathing. "What's up?" he asked, trying to laugh, but the nervousness trembled in his voice. The millionaire stepped forward. His shoes echoed on the marble, and each step was accompanied by the attentive gazes of the guests. He stopped between his wife and the maid, his back to the blonde who still held the trembling tray, and faced directly the woman who minutes before had made the room her stage. "I said enough is enough," he repeated, louder this time, his voice reverberating off the walls. The wife tried to maintain her composure, lifted her chin, and smiled disdainfully. "Are you really going to lower yourself by defending on this?" she said, pointing at the maid as if she were a disposable object. The millionaire took a deep breath, and his eyes sparkled. "It's not her who's debasing herself. It's you." The impact of the sentence was like a bolt of lightning across the room. The guests gasped in shock. Some covered their mouths, others exchanged incredulous looks. Never, in the entire history of that house, had he turned against his wife in public. The maid behind him slowly looked up. Tears were still streaming, but now they were laced with disbelief. Someone, for the first time, had interrupted the chain of humiliation. The wife took a step back, her face flushing, her smile fading. "Are you out of your mind?" she shouted, her voice rising in pitch. "Are you going to throw away our reputation for a servant?" The millionaire stepped even closer, his voice firm as steel. "Reputation isn't built by humiliating others, and if yours depends on it, it's because we've never had anything real." A deathly silence fell. The guests stood motionless, captivated by the scene unfolding like a play. The wife breathed heavily, trying to find a retort, but the weight of the collective disapproval crushed her. The maid, still in disbelief, clutched the tray to her chest, her heart racing. She didn't need to say anything. The scene spoke for itself, and in that moment, the room understood that the night would not end the way everyone expected. The turn of events had begun, and nothing could stop what was to come. The entire room seemed to breathe in unison. The millionaire stood, his wife still with her finger extended, and the maid stood motionless, like a fragile statue about to crumble. The guests were tense, some leaning forward, anxious not to miss a single word. The atmosphere had transformed. It was no longer just a party, it was a courtroom, and everyone awaited the verdict. His wife tried to compose herself, but the mocking smile wouldn't return. "Are you out of your mind?" she said, trying to sound firm. "Are you really going to defend this little maid in front of everyone?" The millionaire didn't take his eyes off her. His voice was deep, but controlled. "What is crazy is thinking that yelling at and humiliating someone smaller makes you great." The impact was immediate. The room was filled with murmurs. Some guests' eyes widened, others exchanged looks of surprise. It was unprecedented. The man who had always supported his wife's theatrics was now publicly contradicting her. The wife was speechless. For a moment she stammered. You're disrespecting me. In front of everyone." "No." He took a step forward, his shadow covering her. "I'm restoring the respect you no longer know what it is." The maid, still behind him, slowly raised her face. Her tear-filled eyes met the scene, and for an instant she felt something she hadn't known. Protection. The weight she'd carried alone for so long was now lifted. The guests, divided between tension and curiosity, commented in low voices, "He's never done this before. Are you really going to choose the maid? This is crazy." The wife, her pride wounded, attempted one last blow. She turned to those present and declared theatrically, "See? He prefers the maid to his own wife." He expected laughter, applause, and support, but what he found was silence. Serious looks, many of them disapproving. His voice, once so powerful, now echoed hollowly. The millionaire took a deep breath and declared in a firm tone, looking directly at everyone, "It's not about choosing between a wife and a maid. It's about choosing between arrogance and respect." The room froze. The sentence hung in the air. Like a sentence, the pale wife took 2 steps back in disbelief. The waitress, head held high, felt tears fall, but this time they were tears of relief. And in that instant, the tables were turned. The power no longer rested with the wealthy wife, but with the millionaire's unexpected decision. The tension in the room was suffocating. The music had stopped, the waiters stood motionless, and even the glasses seemed to vibrate with the electricity in the air. The wealthy wife, still in her glittering red dress, breathed deeply but couldn't find any. Her authority, built on fear and arrogance, crumbled before everyone's eyes. The millionaire stood firm, imposing, staring at her without looking away. His words still echoed in the air. "It's about choosing between arrogance and respect." The guests in disbelief did not know whether to look at the teary-eyed maid, now with her face raised, or at the woman who had just lost the throne she believed to be eternal. His wife, her pride, wounded, decided to react. "Everyone here knows who I am," she shouted, her voice trembling. "I built this house, this name, this empire, and none of you should applaud a man who disrespects me in public." He expected support, but what he got was silence. Some guests looked away, embarrassed. Others discreetly shook their heads in disapproval. His anger only grew. "And you," he said, turning to the maid with a raised finger. You're nothing but a shadow. You're here because I allowed it. You should get down on your knees and thank me every day for cleaning the floors I walk on." The words cut through the air like knives, but this time they didn't provoke laughter. Only discomfort. Many guests were outraged, though still trapped in silence. The maid, for her part, didn't lower her head. Her body trembled, but her eyes met her mistress's with a firmness she had never dared to show. The millionaire stepped forward, his shadow partially covering his wife. His voice was as cold as ice. "Enough! Every word you say only proves to everyone what I've known for a long time. You don't know what greatness is." The hall erupted in murmurs. Some could no longer hide their expressions of disapproval of their wife. Her world, sustained by years of haughtiness, was shattering before an audience that now saw the naked truth. The wife tried to laugh, but her laughter sounded hysterical. "You'll regret applauding this farce," she shouted, looking around, but the disapproving stares silenced her more than any scream. The maid, taking a deep breath, let out a low phrase, but one that echoed in every heart present. "Humiliating others is not power. It is weakness." The sentence ripped through the room like a bolt of lightning. The guests looked at each other, many suppressing the urge to applaud. The millionaire closed his eyes for a moment, as if recognizing the truth of those words, and when he opened them, he looked at his wife with the certainty that the game had changed. At that moment, everyone understood. The mask of the rich wife had fallen, and every gesture she made only deepened her own humiliation. The silence in the hall was heavy as lead. Every guest, every staff member, even the musicians in the corner, seemed paralyzed, trapped in a moment no one ever imagined they would witness. The wife, still in her red dress, was breathing heavily, as if struggling to maintain the mask of superiority she had worn for years. But the millionaire didn't back down. He remained firm, his eyes fixed on her, his imposing posture filling the space with an energy that contrasted with the woman's desperation. She tried to smile, but it came out forced, almost hysterical. "You're getting carried away by cheap theater," she exclaimed, trying to win the guests over to her side. "Everyone here knows that I've always been the voice of this house, that without me none of this would exist." He expected applause, agreement, but what he found was silence. The guests simply glanced at each other, some with expressions of discomfort, others of disapproval. The humiliation that had once fueled laughter was now like an open wound no one wanted to touch. The millionaire took a deep breath and said in a serious tone, "The voice of this house should be that of those who build, not those who destroy. And you have destroyed respect under this roof." The phrase echoed like a sentence. The wife took a step back, her face pale, her breath held. It was then that the millionaire made the decision that would seal the night. He turned to the maid, who was still trembling with the tray in her hands. Her teary eyes met his, and for a moment the world seemed to stop. He approached slowly, as if measuring each gesture. Then, in front of everyone, he took the tray from her hands and placed it on the nearest table. "From today onwards, no one in this house will have the right to humiliate you," he declared, his voice loud and clear for everyone to hear. "Not while I'm here." The room held its breath. The maid clutched her chest in surprise, silent tears streaming down her face. The guests murmured, shocked by the scene. It was the most powerful man in the room defending the woman who, minutes before, had been the target of collective scorn. The furious wife shouted, "You're going to destroy everything because of her." But the millionaire just looked at her and replied, "It's not she who destroys. It's you, with every word you say." The weight of those words was enough for even the most skeptical to understand. The tables had turned. The woman who had always ruled by fear was facing her greatest defeat, and the young maid, previously invisible, was now a symbol of the turnaround everyone had witnessed. The room no longer seemed the same. The glow of the chandeliers, the muffled sound of the still music, and the scent of expensive wine mingled into a charged atmosphere, as if the walls of the mansion were witnessing a historic moment. The millionaire had stood before his wife and, with a few words, shattered years of complicit silence. The wife, however, was not ready to accept defeat. The blood rushed to her face, her eyes flashed with despair. She raised her hand as if she still had the power, pointed it at the waitress again and shouted in a shrill voice, "You're all blind. This girl is nothing. She doesn't deserve to be here." The scream echoed through the hall, but instead of support, it brought an awkward silence. The guests looked away, embarrassed that just minutes before they had reveled in the young woman's humiliation. Some whispered among themselves, "She crossed the line. I've never seen a scene like that." The maid, tears still streaming, slowly raised her face. Her body trembled, but there was a firmness in her eyes. She said nothing. Her silence was more eloquent than any answer. The wife, realizing she was alone, lost control. "Do you want to applaud this farce?" he shouted, turning to face the guests. "Then let them. Applaud, but know that when she steps foot here again, it will be the end of everything we've built." It was at that moment that an elderly lady in an elegant blue dress rose from her chair. Her voice, though calm, carried through the room like a sentence. "The end of what you built has already begun when you decided to humiliate an innocent young woman in front of everyone." The impact was devastating. The hall erupted in murmurs, and some guests even gave a discreet applause. The wife staggered back, as if the ground had disappeared beneath her feet. The millionaire took a deep breath and, for the first time in a long time, smiled genuinely. He turned to those present and said firmly, "This house will no longer be a stage for humiliation. Today, before everyone, I choose respect." The applause grew louder this time, spontaneous, coming from guests who could no longer feign neutrality. It was the wife's definitive downfall and the culmination of her unexpected comeback. The Maid, seeing this, brought her hand to her face to hold back her tears. But it was no longer a cry of pain, but of relief. For the first time she was not alone, and in that instant everyone understood that power had changed hands. The tension in the hall was already unbearable. The millionaire had made a clear statement, choosing respect over arrogance. The maid, still trembling, felt her heart racing, while the guests murmured among themselves, trying to absorb what they were witnessing. His wife, however, refused to accept defeat. Her pride, wounded in front of everyone, turned to fury. She took a deep breath, straightened her shoulders, and tried to regain the authority that was slipping from her hands. "You don't understand," she shouted, her voice higher than ever. "This man is being manipulated. This girl is only here because she took advantage of our generosity. She's worthless." The room fell silent for a moment, but soon some guests shook their heads in disbelief at his wife's insistence. The millionaire looked her straight in the eye, his eyes steady, and said in a low voice but loud enough to echo, "Every word of yours only makes you higher in the eyes of everyone." The sentence hit his wife like an invisible slap. Her eyes widened, and she felt the world around her crumble. Desperate, she decided to resort to her last resort: exposure. "Very well," he exclaimed, turning to the guests. "Do you want to see who she really is? Do you want to know what we've been hiding? Then I'll tell you." The room held its breath. The wife was about to lose all restraint, overcome with resentment. But before she could continue, the young maid lifted her face and, with tears in her eyes, spoke clearly and firmly for the first time. "She doesn't need to say anything. I've always been transparent. What I have is my work and my dignity, and no one has ever been able to take that away from me." The impact was devastating. The audience murmured in agreement. Even some of the most powerful people present, who had always remained neutral, now regarded the wife with contempt. The twist was complete. The humiliation she had planned was backfiring on her. The millionaire took a deep breath and, for the first time, didn't hide his emotion. He turned to everyone and declared, "This house no longer belongs to arrogance. Today, before all of you, I declare that here there will be only room for respect." The guests burst into applause. The pale-faced wife backed away, until she nearly stumbled, her eyes brimming with angry tears. The hall, which had so often been the stage for her sovereignty, now saw her as a pathetic figure. The maid, overcome with emotion, placed her hand on her chest. The tears that escaped her were no longer of pain, but of relief. The justice that seemed impossible was before her, and everyone was witnessing it. And in that instant, it became clear. It no longer mattered how much his wife screamed. The millionaire's decision had sealed her fate. The ballroom, once a stage for ostentation, was now a space charged with tension and shame. His wife, her face flushed with anger, was breathing heavily, her eyes wide with despair. The millionaire stood firm before her, and behind him the blonde maid lifted her face with a silent dignity that contrasted with the tears still streaking her skin. The guests no longer laughed. There was no longer any complicity with the wife's arrogance. What remained were serious looks, some even of open disapproval. It was as if each one realized that for years they had watched the same spectacle of humiliation without doing anything, but that night something had finally changed. The wife still tried to resist. "You don't understand," she shouted, her voice almost breaking. "I am the true mistress of this house. This girl is nothing but an intruder." The millionaire then took a deep breath, stepped forward, and said with a calmness that weighed more than shouting, "The true lady of a house is not the one who shouts the loudest, but the one who commands respect. And you lost yours in front of everyone." The words fell like hammer blows. The wife staggered, her body trembling, her heart crushed not only by her husband, but by the collective judgment surrounding her. The maid, overcome with emotion, put her hand to her chest. She wanted to speak, but realized she didn't need to. Her silence was more powerful than any words. Her erect posture, her steady gaze, said it all. She was no longer the cowering shadow she once was. The guests, one by one, began to applaud discreetly. At first timidly, then louder and louder, until the entire hall echoed with applause. It was a gesture of recognition, not only of the millionaire's courage, but above all of the maid's dignity. The defeated wife covered her face with her hands. Her invisible crown fell before everyone. The millionaire, still serious, turned to the young woman and said, "From today onwards, no one will dare to humiliate you in this house anymore." She nodded, tears of relief streaming down her face. This wasn't a victory of revenge, but of justice. It wasn't her wife's downfall that mattered, but the silent rise of truth before everyone. When the hall fell silent again, everyone knew that night would be remembered forever as the day when the power of arrogance was defeated by the dignity of someone everyone thought was invisible. If this story touched you, leave a like and subscribe to see more stories like this.